Chapter 4. Neptune Calling. I'm to be George's assistant. I heard an unfamiliar baritone announce to Joy as I was sorting fruits and vegetables into their wire mesh boxes in the studio hut. Joy had gone back to the Land Rover to fetch the mail and returned in the company of a blond young man, over 6 feet tall, straight, and well-proportioned. "That's good news," Joy answered, dumping her load on the table. Turning to me, he introduced himself. "Hello, I'm Johnny Baxendale. My dad is George's old friend. In point of fact, the Adamsons are like family. George mentioned you. It's nice to know you." "Thanks," I said. "Nice to meet you." Johnny had veered George's pickup into camp the night Joy and I had returned from the house in Naivasha. His unorthodox eventide call had sparked pandemonium among the Africans, who had darted curiously toward the headlights, just extinguished, like 2 cats' eyes shuttered in the darkness by drooping lids. After a cold drink and a short chat with Joy, into which he had drawn me by way of reminiscing about his trips as a boy, with his twin brother, to the Adamsons' Isiolo house, "Well, better push off," Johnny declared, gathering an armload of envelopes, backdated newspapers, and long overdue magazines for George that we had brought along. "By the way," he said nonchalantly as he climbed into the pickup, "George told me to tell you that his weaver birds nested this year, a month before he'd expected. He said that means the rains are sure to come early to the park." As he revved the motor and waved good-naturedly, we called after him, "Kwaheri, see you soon." "Hope so," he shouted back. As I returned to my produce sorting, I thought of all the hustle and bustle that must have been going on in the acacia branches above George's studio hut. When Joy and I had visited there last, the vacated nests had dangled perilously, bleached brittle by the sun, and only a few of the brown and white female birds, with their handsome yellow and black male counterparts, had remained to argue frantically over the seeds that George dispensed in the late afternoons. George and his weavers should have taken the grand prize for weather forecasting. That night it rained. It rained the next night, and the next, and the next. One morning a week after Johnny's appearance, I had just started to type in Joy's hut when something felt different. I glanced across the gleaming plain. Swollen with water pouring down from the Nyambene Mountains, the rivulet raged. Gathering what I could, I raced toward my hut. Along with the store hut, it sat on higher ground. En route for a second load, I brushed past Joy and Choka, manning the ends of her mosquito-netted camp bed. Like me, they hadn't sounded a warning, yet at precisely the same instant we had all realized the rivulet's intentions. Back and forth, as the water level surged higher and higher, we hauled, pulled, shoved, tugged, dragged, and stacked in silence, until my hut and the store hut were jammed. Within half an hour, Joy's hut and the studio stood in 3 feet of water. The papaya trees had been reduced to large weeds, while the great tamarind tree swayed and rustled over a curious green-brown sea below. At its widest point, the rivulet normally stretched about 8 feet. The sudden high tide, however, had added another 15 feet to its girth. "Now what?" I asked Joy, who stood paralyzed in the comparative aridity, only 1.5 feet of water, of my hut. "The cameras. What else?" We laughed. "Move over there a little. I want to get the hut in the picture too," Joy directed. When I got there, the mud sucked off my right rubber shoe. I slid my foot into it, ooze and all, lifting the left foot, but that shoe stayed behind as well. "Stanley's coming," Joy reassured me. Stanley, pronounced Stanley by the Africans, the third of Joy's servants, was a wiry, warm-hearted little fellow, always ready to wrest the greatest dramatic value from every situation. Gallantly he waded toward me, refusing to attempt any rescue before posing proudly, rigidly, for Joy's Bolex. "The kitchen's drowned," Joy observed laconically after Stanley's strong arm had guided me through the muck and the knee-deep water to Joy's location. Wonder what we'll do about Chocula. I can light that Primus stove we found, I offered. Guess we'll have to sleep out under the stars, though. Not on your life, she asserted grimly, which is what might be sacrificed if we did. I had a special seat conversion put in the Land Rover. We'll make up our beds in there. It'll be squashed, but better than nothing. In our quarters that night, I tried to snuggle up to the window pane, but its dankness made it a poor bedfellow. There were other bedfellows, however. Joy, I whispered to the bundled lump only inches away. The doo-doos really come out in the rain, don't they? One of them has crawled inside my covers, and it's chewing me to bits. In Swahili, you know, she replied in the most matter-of-fact voice. A doo-doo is anything smaller than an elephant. I beg your pardon, I barked, but got no reply. I had just dropped into a sound sleep when Joy said drowsily, Netta, please close your window. Then a little while later she muttered, Netta, please open your window now, as the shower that had pounded the Land Rover's roof died away. Every day for 2 weeks thereafter, fires burned in metal pans inside the soggy huts. Joy and I slept, ate, worked, and played in the Land Rover. Then, unexpectedly, the rain ebbed, temporarily relieving our confinement by sending the brightest, hottest, most penetrating sunlight to aid the camp's drying. On the day we finally decided the huts could be inhabited again, George and Johnny paid us a surprise visit. We thought we'd just check the roads, see how far we could go, Johnny said. Then he asked with an impish look in his eye, Remember that day it poured the hardest? Well, first I heard a cracking noise, then a magnificent roar, from George, then the most awful swearing. George turned a ghastly shade of red, but Johnny rambled on, ignoring George's embarrassment. His hut had crashed on top of him. Luckily he wasn't hurt, but we had to winch the whole lot back up again. And it stayed up? I asked incredulously. Until the next rains, Joy advised curtly, her tone turning to a whine as she pulled George toward our temporarily stilled body of water. Now, George, I want you to tell me why our rivulet overflowed so terribly. It was bad last year, but nothing like this. The bridge, he reckoned, pointing his pipe at the culprit. It's blocking the stream. Raise it, or get rid of it. That's Pippa's bridge, George. You're going to have to raise it. How else will she get across? Here we go again, Johnny winked at me. While Johnny and George organized the winch, hoisting aloft the offending logs and planks, Joy rounded up Twittengrew, Stanley, and Choka, her cavaliers, as she called the men. The next thing I knew, they had set to work cleaning up the rivulet banks. After a cursory inventory on the day of the camp's initial flooding, Joy had wearily informed me that her toothbrushes were gone. Bet they've floated into the river and got stuck in some croc's jaw, I said, trying to cheer her up. But moments after the men had launched their rivulet beautification, I spotted Choka, beaming mischievously, approaching Joy with something in his hand. Just look, she exclaimed. He carried one of her toothbrushes, which he had yanked out of a pile of leaves and litter clogging the waterway. Again that night it poured. Day in and day out it rained. Joy and I functioned on top of each other, unable even to conjure up what it might be like to see another soul. Above us at one moment the sun beamed innocently in a cloud-dotted sky, tantalizing us with a promise of dry days ahead. Instead, rolling over the feathery blueness in huge waves, the oncoming rains bombarded us with lightning and thunder, and with crashing, ripping winds, out of all proportion to the land's serenity. How could those clouds have saved up so much water? I mused, as they dumped load after load, savagely soaking the thirsty earth. Through the many dry months, the clouds had saved. They had conserved their moisture, knowing well the exact moment at which it had to be expelled to maintain the balance of Africa's two seasons, the wet and the dry. Bug-ringed, the gas lamp sputtered in the muggy studio hut. Although we had thrown the wooden bolts across both doors, still the wind tore them open, hurling the heavy rain at us. For makeshift locks, chairs and tables had then been called into action. The middle of March, Joy sighed, yearning for a return to the openness of the evenings we had spent blanketed by the bright stars, the void-like blackness of clear nights. "Here's a letter from my accountant." She slipped her glasses over her ears. That afternoon, the warden had dropped a mail parcel into the camp from his plane. There had been no other way for him to get through. "Look at this. He says it's imperative that you come to Nairobi to arrange the extension to your visitor's permit." Reading, she continued, "I've taken the liberty of phoning the Hawthorns, and they will be expecting Miss Pfeifer." Staring at a large picture of Elsa on the wall behind us, I noticed that a gecko had taken up residence on the frame. He had assumed its exact color, allowing him great liberties in the bug buffet. "It's incredible, isn't it, how nature takes care of everyone's needs," I observed, indicating the gecko's carnivorous activities. "Of course," she acknowledged curtly. "But what about this letter? Did you hear it?" "I heard, but how on earth am I going to get to Nairobi?" "I suppose you're right," she answered distractedly, buttoning her sweater against the sudden chill. "We'll have to manage something, though, within the next 3 weeks. I was so hoping we could do this by mail." "That was nice of him, wasn't it, to call the Hawthorns?" "Very nice," I agreed. "It'll be lovely to see them again." "You can get back to your yoga," she suggested disparagingly. "Judging from my last visit with them, I doubt there'll be much time for that." "That's still important to you, isn't it?" "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to fathom her hostility. "I'd expected you to be just the right person to work for Elsa," she began bitterly. "Then you showed up here talking about yoga and never a word about Elsa. Well, I decided to wait. You'd see the light. But you're still thinking about nothing but yoga." "If you want to work for Elsa," she decreed, glaring blankly at me, grouping the correspondence into neat piles for the morning's dictation, "you'll have to put blinders on." Hurt, angered, and astonished, I screamed inside, "Put blinders on?" Joy had reached to return the lamp to its niche amongst Elsa mementos on the filing cabinet. "Maybe," I responded flatly, pulling myself together. "But I think right now we've had too much rain." Mildew had appeared in unlikely places. Every roof leaked, and in the oblivion of the nights, with the howling wind batting wildly against the hut doors, we had to shift furniture, clothes, cartons, and other perishables to keep them from getting soaked. Our daily walks had been reduced to puddle jumping sessions. Even in the studio hut, we danced around puddles, grabbing bowls and buckets to catch the pesky drops. "Just think," Joy remarked mercurially. "Pippa's out there in all this. Her first litter was born 2 years ago during the rainy season, and they all perished. I never did find out how or why. Now, this litter will come during the rains. Oh, I wonder if they'll survive. I wonder," she said, as if beseeching the power of the wet world for an answer. Something had already told me that Pippa's forthcoming cubs would not survive. Therefore, I wanted to talk about, think about, anything but Pippa. "George's birds," I said. "It's all their fault."